The steam from the shower clung to the bathroom mirror, fogging up the edges of my reflection as I stepped under the hot spray. The tightness in my muscles from the intense tennis game began to melt away, replaced by the soothing heat of the water. I closed my eyes, letting the droplets cascade down my body, the sound of the water hitting the tiles filling the room. The faint scent of my lavender body wash mingled with the steam, creating a tranquil atmosphere that I wished could last forever. But then I heard it. A soft creak of the bathroom door. My eyes snapped open, and my heart skipped a beat. I held my breath, listening intently. The sound was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. The privacy of the bathroom, my sanctuary, had been breached. I turned off the shower, the sudden silence amplifying my unease. The only sound now was the faint drip of water from the faucet and the pounding of my heart. I grabbed a towel, hastily wrapping it around my body, and stepped out of the shower. My bare feet made no sound on the damp tiles as I moved toward the door. I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob, my mind racing. Who could it be? And then I saw it. My black lace lingerie, the one I had carelessly tossed onto the floor before stepping into the shower, was no longer where I had left it. Instead, it was clutched in the hands of my stepson, Ethan. He was standing just outside the bathroom, his back to me, his shoulders tense. The sight of him holding my lingerie sent a shiver down my spine, a mix of shock and something else, something I couldn't quite name. I watched, frozen, as he brought the delicate fabric to his face, inhaling deeply, his eyes closed in what could only be described as pure longing. My breath hitched, and I felt a flush of heat spread through my body, though whether it was from embarrassment or something darker, I couldn't tell. And then he did something that made my stomach twist. He pressed the lingerie against his tool, his hips moving in a slow, deliberate motion, as if he were trying to savor the sensation. His breathing grew heavier, more labored, and I could see the faint tremble in his hands. My pulse quickened, and I felt a strange, tingling sensation in the pit of my stomach. What was happening here? What was he doing? I should have stopped him. I should have made my presence known, put an end to this twisted little scene. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away, unable to move. My mind raced with conflicting emotions, disbelief, curiosity, and a strange, inexplicable thrill. My heart was pounding so loudly in my ears that I was sure he would hear it. And then, as if sensing my presence, Ethan froze. His body went rigid, his hands clutching my lingerie tightly, and then, slowly, he turned around. Our eyes met. His face was flushed, his pupils dilated with desire, and for a moment, neither of us said a word. The air between us was thick with tension, charged with an unspoken understanding. "Ethan," I finally managed to whisper, my voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, his gaze dropped to the towel wrapped around my body, his eyes lingering on the exposed skin at the edge of the fabric. I felt a wave of heat rush through me, my cheeks burning with a mix of shame and something else, something I couldn't quite admit to myself. I am sorry," he stammered, his voice low and rough. "I didn't mean to. I just..." He trailed off, unable to finish his sentence. His eyes met mine again, and in that moment, I saw something raw, something primal. It was a look that sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core. I took a step closer to him, the damp towel slipping slightly as I moved. His breath hitched, and I could see the way his chest rose and fell with each labored breath. He was still holding my lingerie, his knuckles white with the force of his grip. "What are you doing, Ethan?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though I already knew the answer. He didn't respond. Instead, he took a step closer to me, closing the distance between us. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made it hard to breathe. His eyes were locked on mine, and I could see the hunger in them, the kind of hunger that couldn't be ignored. "I couldn't help it," he finally admitted, his voice low and husky. "I've been thinking about you, about this, for so long. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a strange mixture of emotions, shock, fear, and something else, something that made my body tingle with anticipation. "Ethan, we can't," I started to say, but my voice faltered, the words catching in my throat. "Please," he whispered, his eyes pleading with me. "Just once. Let me." He reached out, his fingers brushing against the edge of my towel, sending a shiver down my spine. My breath hitched, and I felt a wave of heat rush through me. I should have stopped him. I should have pulled away, put an end to this madness before it went any further. But I didn't. Instead, I let the towel fall to the floor, exposing my bare body to his hungry gaze. His breath caught, and I could see the way his eyes devoured me, taking in every curve, every inch of skin. "You're beautiful," he breathed, his voice trembling with desire. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the heat radiating from his body as he stepped closer, his hands hovering over my skin, as if he were afraid to touch me. And then he did. His hands were warm as they explored my body, his touch tentative at first, but growing bolder with each passing moment. My breath hitched, and I felt a wave of pleasure rush through me as his fingers traced the curve of my waist, sending shivers down my spine. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice trembling with desire. He didn't respond. Instead, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a tentative kiss. The moment our lips touched, a jolt of electricity shot through me, and I felt myself melting into his embrace. His kiss was hungry, desperate, and I could feel the intensity of his desire in every movement of his lips. My hands found their way to his chest, and I could feel the rapid beating of his heart beneath my fingertips. His body was warm, solid, and I could feel the tension in his muscles as he held me close. The kiss deepened, and I felt a surge of wanton desire course through me, driving me to press myself against him, to feel the heat of his body against mine. And then, with a sudden burst of courage, I reached down, my hand brushing against the hardness that strained against his pants. He groaned, his hips jerking forward, and I felt a thrill of power at the knowledge that I was the one who had done that to him. "Ethan," I whispered again, my voice trembling with need. "Just tell me what you want," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with conflicting emotions. But then I made my decision. "Touch me," I breathed, my voice barely audible. His hands immediately moved to my melon, his fingers teasing my hardened peak until they were hard and sensitive. I moaned, my head falling back as pleasure coursed through me. His lips found my neck, hissing and nibbling at the sensitive skin, and I could feel the heat of his breath against my skin. His hands moved lower, exploring every inch of my body, igniting a fire that I couldn't control. My breathing grew ragged, and I could feel the tension building inside me, threatening to explode. And then his fingers found the sensitive spot between my legs, and I gasped, my body arching against his touch. He teased me, his fingers moving in slow, deliberate circles, and I felt myself teetering on the edge of ecstasy. "Ethan," I moaned, my voice trembling with need. But he didn't stop. Instead, he leaned in, his lips capturing mine in a passionate kiss as his fingers continued to work their magic. I could feel the tension building inside me, and I knew I was close, so close, but I needed more. "Please," I whispered, my voice trembling with desperation. "I need you." He didn't need to be told twice. In one swift motion, he lifted me up, carrying me to the bed and laying me down gently. His hands were trembling as he fumbled with the button on his pants, and I could see the hunger in his eyes as he looked down at me. And then he was inside me, and I felt a wave of pleasure so intense that I cried out, my body arching against his. He moved slowly at first, his hips rocking against mine in a rhythm that drove me wild. But soon, the pace quickened, and I could feel the tension building inside me again, threatening to explode. "Don't stop," I begged, my voice trembling with need. And he didn't. Instead, he thrust into me harder, his body slamming against mine with each powerful stroke. I could feel the heat of his body against mine, and I could hear the sound of our bodies moving together, a symphony of pleasure that drove me to the edge. And then, with one final thrust, I felt myself shatter, my body convulsing with pleasure as waves of ecstasy washed over me. He followed soon after, his body shuddering as he found his release, his cry of pleasure mingling with mine. For a moment, we lay there, our bodies tangled together, our breathing ragged and our hearts pounding. The room was filled with the scent of sweat and desire, and I could feel the warmth of his body against mine. But then, as the haze of pleasure began to fade, reality came crashing back in, and I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I sat up, suddenly feeling exposed, and began to move away. "Wait," he said, his voice soft but firm. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest as I turned to look at him. "Don't go," he whispered, his eyes pleading with me. But I couldn't stay. I couldn't pretend that what had just happened was okay. So I got up, pulled my lingerie from the floor, and quickly got dressed, avoiding his gaze. "Ethan, we can't do this again," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. But as I walked out of the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over.